What's up, guys? Welcome to another Thursday Home Theater Hangout. Today, I've got a very special guest, Mr. Andrew Jones,
Hi guys.
and we've got Zach from Dream Media. So,
What's up, guys?
Zach and Andrew, what are we checking out today? What's today's topic?
Me.
Yeah,
I thought,
thanks. Appreciate you having us on. I'll go ahead and take it away, Andrew. We have recently onboarded MoFi, and Andrew Jones is the uh, creator of the speakers, and we wanted to bring him in to give us a little insight into what he's been up to in the industry in the past and what he has done with these beautiful speakers. I had the pleasure of hearing them in person a couple weeks back and was really blown away. We had the SourcePoint 10s in house, which now you guys can hear on demo if you would like, if you wanted to visit the Dream Media showroom. We were pairing that with a Hi-Fi Rose. So just wanted to bring Andrew on today to give you guys a little insight as the creator of the speakers. Andrew, you want to take it away?
yeah. Well, I mean, this is fun. I like talking about myself and my products. So. um, as far as background, I've been interested in hi-fi since early teens, or even pre-teens. Always as a geek. I have an identical twin brother, and we both got interested in the same subjects. We were always geeks and interested in science. At one point, my ambition was to be an astronaut. But in those days, that wasn't going to really happen from the UK, although I ended up in the USA anyway. Um, but, you know, we got gifted. My dad had a little stereo setup. We got gifted an all in one record player, amplifier, speaker box in a sort of suitcase type thing, and a whole load of 45s from the 50s and early 60s. And so that was our first system that we owned as a part from what my dad owned. But we'd been reading magazines, not hi-fi magazines in those days. I don't even know if they were around in those days. But Practical Wireless and Practical Electronics, and there was some advice on what you should do. And Wireless World was a big influence. And so we got Dad to upgrade his system, and then we were listening to ours. And as we got older and got some pocket money and saved money, we graduated. Ended up with, before we went off to university, we got a Thorens TD160, Shaw V15 Mark III cartridge, a crappy little Sinclair amplifier, and the speakers ironically were the worst part of the system. A single 8-inch full range Whizzer Cone driver bought from a music store, not a hi-fi store. But the specs supposedly were really good. And looking back, the specs would have been absolutely awful. But it was our starter system. Um, but we both got so enamored with hi-fi that we decided that's what we want to do. So all the way through school, since we're always geeks anyway, it was always the main subject we were interested in is maths, physics, chemistry. Um, Chemistry comes third, especially with organic chemistry. The only fun was watching the teachers do practical experiments on the front bench, and we'd sit there with our cameras. We got away with so much at school, but we'd sit in front of the bench when the teacher was doing a demo, and we were watching it through our camera because we wanted to capture the moment something went wrong. And it very often did. Either it disappeared behind a sheet of flames or it break stuff. Um, so that's what we were, always playing around with electronics and electrocuting people and jamming their radios when they're listening to cricket in the afternoon when the test match was on. So we we'd got this interest in hi-fi, and we realised that that's what we want to pursue. So I went off to university to do physics, and my brother went to a different university to study electronics. And once we graduated, we joined each other in a postgraduate research group at his university. My postgraduate research was computer aided crossover design, the very early days of doing that. He was studying amplifier topologies. And then I stayed on in another research group to do active noise control. And he eventually joined me in that group and then had a career of about 30 years doing noise cancelling headsets, which of course are ubiquitous now, but he started with the early days of gradually improving them. So one day I'd been having a chat with Laurie Fincham, who was the technical director at KEF. And KEF was a dream place for me in those days. If I want to learn anything about speakers, truly about speakers, KEF was going to be, it would either been BMW or KEF, but KEF to me was the gold standard. And Laurie Fincham actually offered me a job there. And I was ecstatic until the day I was starting thinking, oh my God, can I really do this? Am I really good enough for joining KEF? But apparently I was, because I stayed there 11 years and ended up as chief engineer, working directly under Laurie, who was as I say, the technical director. So learned lots of stuff, met all the best people in the industry. Good personal friend of mine was Peter Walker, who founded Quad and did all the quad electrostatic speakers. In fact, he offered me a job to understudy when he was retiring, but I kind of thought, it might not be as more of a dead-end job just doing electrostatics than regular speakers, so I continued on. But then Floyd Toole invited both Laurie and myself over to the States, and that was a big move. New job, new country. But I came over, I let my boss, Laurie, come over first, give it a year, tell me what he thinks of America. and then after a year, I moved over. Although I must say, I resigned. England time, it was mid-morning. California time, it was early morning. But I resigned, told my bosses, they knew it was coming, but I said, I'm taking that job in Northridge, California. 2 hours later, Northridge earthquake hit.
Oh, man.
So they all came down, you can tear up that resignation if you want, you can stay. No, it's happened now. By the time I get over there and my visa's sorted out, it should be back to normal. So, moved out to the States. And this year, actually, 2024, is my 30th anniversary of being here in the States. And coincidentally, my 50th anniversary of going off to university to study physics. So it's a very, very interesting year for me. I hope I do something with it to mark it.
Congratulations.
Special.
Hey, Andrew, were you the one that created the up-firing Atmos speakers?
Yes. So, that was when I was with Pioneer.
Yep.
And Pioneer, from an electronics point of view, the receivers, obviously they were heavily connected with anything that Dolby were doing, because whenever a new Dolby system comes out, the receivers have to add the decoding to do it. And so in the pre-release days of Atmos, they started talking to us and developing the receivers over in Japan. And one of my colleagues, we were at CAS, I think, and one of my colleagues I work closely with in product development, he got to listen to a very early demonstration of Atmos and came back saying, Andrew, you've got to listen to this. This is really interesting. This could be something very important. They wouldn't let me in to listen. They didn't want the potential criticism or critique at that early stage. My colleague wasn't his ears weren't that good. When they did eventually give me a demo, I thought, wow, this is fantastic. But, the first demo I heard, you got not only the 5 speakers or 7 speakers in the surround sound system and the subwoofers, you got speakers overhead. And I said, very interesting, but we have enough problems getting people to listen to 5 speakers. Never mind adding even more. And then they said, aha, but. And then they showed us the upward firing concept of bouncing off the ceiling. And I actually preferred the sound of that to the discrete one, because with a low ceiling, you're a bit too close if it's only 8 foot. And so all the image pulls a bit. Whereas if it's reflected in the ceiling, it's as though the speakers were equal distance above the ceiling as you are below. And it just gives a ease of listening location that made it feel better. Maybe not quite as precise, but it just felt more enveloping. So that's the one. That's the one I'm interested in. So we got the license to start developing something. And it seemed to me all the solutions that they were offering us, this is the technology and this is how you could do it. I thought, no, I don't really like that idea. And I'm thinking, well, concentric drivers are perfect. If I develop a 4-inch concentric driver, it will be the perfect solution to doing the firing system. And so we released a 3-way concentric, so 4-inch forward firing concentric with a 5-inch, I think, woofer, and then the extra concentric on top. And that was one of the first Dolby Atmos up-firing module type speakers to come out. And it sounded really good. I mean, it should do. It was a 3-way concentric driver.
What year was that, Andrew?
Ooh. Could be, I don't actually remember. I mean, it's certainly more than 9 years ago now.
Sounds about right.
So, yeah.
Just give people kind of a timeline as to how things developed, how you got to MoFi.
Well, I'm so old. I've been doing this for so long.
Hey, was there a deliberate 2K notch in the up-firing speakers? Is there a reason for that?
So it requires this peak and a notch, and they'd suggested all sorts of ways of doing that. But I realized that if I sort of design the upward firing speaker wrong, in my usual way of how, if you design a concentric driver wrong, you're going to get some peaks and notches in the higher frequency range, which disappear when you move a bit off axis. So, with some care, you can get rid of it. And I mean, in particular, the latest speakers from KEF, they do a magnificent job of minimizing or eliminating entirely on axis. But it's very difficult to do with production tolerances and things you have to do to get a concentric driver working.
Right.
So I realized if I change some of the way I was putting this concentric driver together, I can move that peak and the dip that I would have got by designing it badly. I can position it where Dolby wanted it. And I don't even have to put any circuits in there. I kind of just have to do a poor concentric in that sense. So that's what I did.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
I passed all the Dolby licensing tests that they did. And I even, I liked Dolby Atmos at that time so much that they even, as one of the first manufacturers to offer a dedicated Dolby Atmos system, I used to go on all their panels when they were at various shows to kind of put the manufacturing viewpoint towards what Dolby was, Dolby Atmos.
Right. Okay. Interesting. So then from there, you went over to MoFi.
Nowadays, I just listen in 2-channel. I always did mostly listen in 2-channel. I think later on, when they started doing the sound bars, which they're able to do processing in a way to create quite an interesting surround field from just basically 2 speakers for a horizontal sound field, but add some upward ones to get height. That can be very effective. And it's very not simple from a DSP point of view, but from a system setup point of view. And I know we always, last thing we did literally choose to listen to is a sound bar as opposed to real speakers in a stereo setup. But as a way of avoiding putting speakers all the way around the room, and doing it badly very often, then I think it's a very viable alternative. But and certainly at my home, I've never really put in a multi-channel system.
Oh, wow.
When I do listen to movies in full sound, I think, oh yeah, that's really good. But I suppose partly, I've always lived in homes where I live in condos, in the heart of Los Angeles, West Hollywood. And condos are not conducive to having a full surround sound system blasting out movies with explosions. Someone's always going to tell me to take it, turn down the volume, either my wife or the dogs. I used to have a dog that sat under the dining table and howled whenever I played even music. So a lot of my pleasure listening is actually done in my work environment, and especially now with MoFi, I've set up this office in Beverly Hills, and I got this beautiful environment, and it's me. It's just me. I said to MoFi, jumping forward quite a couple of decades, but I said to MoFi when we were talking about joining, and they're headquartered in Chicago, and MoFi Electronics, the manufacturing division, is in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I said, you know I'm not moving to Chicago, don't you? Other than cost-wise, you don't really move away from the weather that we get in Southern California to go to Chicago or Michigan. And so Jim Davis, the owner, he said, no, we kind of gathered that. So go and find a facility. And I decided I'm not driving. When I worked with ELAC, it was a 40-mile drive each way every day in LA traffic. And getting too old for that. So I said, I'm going to find somewhere near. And it just happened that I found this office space. And it's just within Beverly Hills. 90211. Couldn't quite get 90210, but I say 90211 is one better than 902. I'm here, and we fitted out this listening room. It's 20 foot by 30 foot, about 11-foot ceilings, and we've decorated it to feel like you're at home. And especially with all the mess I have laying around, it's just like being at home. But it's done in a manner that it's not obviously sound treated. There's a couple of there are some panels in parts of the ceiling that hang down. They look like interesting decor, but they are acoustic panels just because the ceiling was so high, and there's some support beams that would have maybe made the ceiling reflections a bit odd. But other than that, I mean, you can see behind me the 20-foot wide by 8-foot high bookshelves, and every book I own, every CD I own, every interesting little thing. I got my turntable, I got some of the speakers I've done, cameras, all sorts of things. I just put out there as diffusion in the rear, and then I got some absorption at the front disguised as paintings. I took pictures of some of the paintings my wife had done, blew them up onto acoustic grill cloth material, and stretched them over frames, and behind that put absorber, so you wouldn't know there's absorber there. But I've a nice carpet and a big sofa. One of the big things, soft furnishings, and this is a huge sectional sofa. The problem when we think about treating rooms is we often stick things on the wall. Or if we're putting stuffing inside speaker cabinets, we line the walls of the cabinets. That's the wrong place to put absorbent. It doesn't work very well there. So the more you can get in the middle of the room, the better. And the room originally sounded very lively, but it had that feel that it could be great. And as soon as I brought in this sofa, it immediately started to sound so much better. And then with the treatments I've done that, let's say, you wouldn't really know it's treatment, it sounds one of the best environments I've been in. So it's a great space for developing my speakers and showing people what it can do. And I can play as loud as I want and keep the dogs away and keep my wife away and just sit there and pretend that this is work.
Yeah, right.
This is great. I'm glad you shared that with us. Me and Kellen, our national sales director, are going to be coming to LA here shortly. We have a high-end theater that's finishing up, and I'd love to swing by and
Sure.
check out the space and listen to some records. We just set up our first 2-channel hi-fi room, so we're kind of doing it backwards. We're a little bit younger and kind of started in Dolby Digital and Dolby Atmos. HDMI was just getting introduced when I got in the industry. So now we're kind of going in reverse. We're feeling the nostalgic vibes and, embracing the 2-channel culture. So we've created a 2-channel listening room that customers can come and experience as well. But one of the first speakers we put in there was the MoFi, the SourcePoint 10. So I wanted our customers to hear from the creator. You're a legend in the industry and you've created a lot of amazing products over the years, but what inspired you to make these the MoFi speakers?
Whenever you start let's say with a new company, you're always going to be thinking, what can I do? What are all these ideas I've had in my mind that have maybe not been appropriate for the company I was with prior to that? Do I have time to develop something different? And I remember when I first joined Pioneer and the first real speaker project, and I was given basically a blank sheet of paper and said, design something. And that's exhilarating and scary at the same time, because now you got to decide, well, of all the things I've always thought about, which ones should I do? And some of the crazier ideas, will they actually work? So with MoFi, this is something, we haven't been doing lines of speakers. A full speaker company that only exists doing speakers, you end up having a lot of different lines of speakers from low cost to higher cost. And you maybe have a small bookshelf and a bigger bookshelf and a small tower and a bigger tower and a center channel and a bigger center channel and numerous subwoofers. And then that's one series. Then you do another series, which is maybe a different price point, and you keep on going. And I always seem to be giving birth. It can be very tiring. So with MoFi, especially, if it's a big deal that I'm not just that I'm joining MoFi, no, not just that they're going to do some speakers, but they're going to have me doing the speakers, then we want to make some kind of statement, not just another ho-hum me too speaker, and have time to think of what should it be. And the only real briefs, they trusted me to kind of, Andrew, do what you think you want to do. But there were only very limited briefs of things that they wanted. One of which was they like bass, good, impactful bass. And it's been popular for the last few years, this throwback to mid-century modern style, both in interior design and furniture and speakers, rebirth of the JBL L100 and that class of speaker. So big boxes. Because in recent years, everything's got narrower and narrower. So if you want bass, you stack a lot of drivers, small drivers on the front, and then maybe you put some side-firing woofers, or you have to cross over to a subwoofer. So that gives you limited scope for how good bass you can get. And yet in the old days, we always used to have 10 and 12 inch and maybe even 15-inch bass drivers in big square boxes. They were not very deep, but they were still big boxes. And that's back in. So, that could be interesting. That would satisfy the requirement for good bass. But what else do I add to that? Let's say we'll pick a 10-inch bass driver. And I'm known for concentric drivers, so clearly I'd be thinking along the lines of doing a new concentric driver. So it'd be a concentric driver plus a 10-inch bass driver. But now that's starting to add to the cost. And we've got a rough guideline of sort of maybe the price range we were aiming at, which of course I exceeded. It became so interesting that, okay, yes, carry on.
They're still at a reasonable price point, though.
It's still a reasonable price point, yes. Yeah. And I will say, just as a diversion, I did get some kickback from online. Yeah, it's always a mistake to read the online comments. But has Andrew abandoned the affordable hi-fi and now he's doing Chinese speakers at higher price points and all kind of stuff like that. I'm going, we've always been built in China for the last few years. The only way you can have $100 speaker is to build it in China. Yep. And that Pioneer 129 BS22 speaker that everybody loved. But if you want to incorporate lots of technology in, the price goes up and up. And I wanted to do something different with this speaker. And I haven't, it's not like I've abandoned it. I mean, come on, 6 years at ELAC and at least 4 of the years, 5-6 years prior to that with Pioneer doing low-cost systems. I kind of earned my right to play in the midfield for a while. So am I going to do a concentric driver plus a 10-inch bass driver? But that's, that has the potential costing maybe more than we were initially targeting. So, and my problem was, I've always said that a concentric driver, if I'm going to do one, it's going to be part of a 3-way system. Because if the cone moves too far, you hear some modulation effects. And so by making a 3-way, there's no bass going into that mid-range cone to make it move too far. And so it performs better that way. But if I've got a 10-inch driver, that really doesn't move far at all most of the time for producing the bass at levels people routinely listen at, unless you're cranking for a party or you've got some really loud low bass signals. So I'm thinking, what if it was a 10-inch concentric? That allows me to do a 2-way, but the cone doesn't move too much, so I don't get those modulation effects. And a 2-way greatly simplifies some aspects of the design and the cost. But will it work? And as I'm designing all the driver parts and looking at magnet structures, I wanted something different from the typical generic magnet structures that I'd been using previously, except for what I use for the TAD systems. And so I started to come up with these stacked magnets that would drive both the tweeter and the woofer and get extra flux density in the tweeter to make it high efficiency, and it would minimize distortion. But it was going to be a very difficult construction because the magnets had to be, the two big neomagnets I've got in there have to be reverse polarized with respect to each other. Normally when you build a magnet system, the magnets are not yet magnetized. So you just glue all the parts together, build the driver, and then at the last minute put it in the magnetizer and whack it with this huge magnetic field. And now everything's magnetized and it's all operational. But if you've got magnets in reverse polarity, you can't do that. You have to magnetize them first and then try and glue them apart. But they're either going to either pull together or they're going to repel each other. And that can be very dangerous. And it greatly complicates construction. And so the whole of the build process, you've got the magnets all charged and potentially attracting crap into the gap. And so the costs go up quite substantially when you're building something like that. It has this capability of linearizing the system and giving me the flux densities I wanted. And so that's what I went with. The trouble is, until I've tooled up all the parts, I don't know if it's going to work. Especially with 10-inch cone, I had to tool the cone, tool the surround, tool some of the magnet parts before I could build a working sample and say either, oh, it doesn't work, or, ooh, it works. Luckily, it was the latter. When I got the drivers and I started measuring them and go, oh, they measure actually very well. And put together a crossover and put it in a box and started listening and think, oh, this has something about it. So, it worked out. And I was very grateful it worked out. So that became the SourcePoint 10. And it's funny, it's called SourcePoint because whenever you got some technologies in hi-fi, you're always going to name it. I remember there was an amplifier from Japan, the dual diamond differential circuit, and that was all spelt out on the front panel of the amplifier because they're so proud of not only the technology but having this fantastic sounding name for it. And you go back to the days of the KEF Unify, and that was Laurie Fincham, my boss, came up with that name, Unify, because uni means one. Sorry, that was me at Pioneer. Unify. UniQ. Uni means one.
UniQ, yeah.
UniQ. Uni means one. Q is the symbol for directivity constant. And the problem with regular drivers, their directivities are different between the woofer and the tweeter, which gives you problems crossing over and maintaining smooth off-axis response. So UniQ meant one directivity and unique. So it was a fantastic name. So when I did my speakers for ELAC, I came up with the name Unify, kind of to unify the tweeter into the mid-range to make one driver and kind of one fidelity. So for SourcePoint, because what we're saying basically is the driver, especially since it's now a two-way system, so there's just the base mid-range, there's one driver and the tweeter is the other. They're kind of a point source. All the sound comes from the same axis, and there's no problems moving off axis from timing, going out, and phasing. But point source is too generic to use as the name because everyone talks about technically a point source of sound. And someone came up with the idea of just switching it around, kind of source point instead of point source. Ooh, that works quite nicely because it's still saying the source is a point, and the source, given that MoFi, doing all the mastering and pressing of the records, it identifies us as also knowing what the source of the sound is. So I thought that worked quite nicely. So that's what we released as the first speaker. And it's always funny when the whole brief was to do a bigger, squarer speaker. And I think it looks quite unique because of the way we've incorporated the faceting. Faceting the baffle is not new. There's lots of other speakers on the market that do that in order to control. Whenever you put, especially a tweeter, onto a flat baffle and you've got edges all the way around it, those edges diffract the sound and give you bumps and dips in the response. And so in order to minimize those, you either keep the edges as far away as possible, which means you'll have a huge speaker, or you sort of bend the baffle backwards. And you can do that either as facets or a continuous curve. Now in the TAD, I did it as a continuous curve. But with this, I thought, continuous curve doesn't really match the aesthetic we want. So let's look at doing facets. And the guy who was doing the industrial design, I showed him lots of speakers with different shapes of facets. So he played around with that, but he put that picture frame around the edge. And when I saw that, I thought, yes, mid-century modern, 70s speakers, all had that picture frame. That is perfect. It's a nice blend between modern and old. And then the grill, of course, is molded to have that same facet shape, but because it's cloth covered, just tones down the apparent angularity of it. I mean, that's the lighting on that. You can kind of just see it. But that's the point. It's still got the shape, but it's toned down in case you don't like the edges of the facets. So it worked very nicely, that.
I love the design. That mid-century modern is just right on point. Maybe, Shane, you could show a couple pictures of the speakers in our demo space to show a real-world application, but they looked really stunning. I love the aesthetic.
And what was interesting, I demonstrated at all these shows, and people have heard about them. They come in to listen. So many people walk in and go, "Oh, they're a bit bigger than I was thinking." And I think, how big do you think a speaker is when it's got a 10-inch bass driver in it? Yes, exactly.
They're large and in charge.
Yes. But guys, that was the whole point. We're fulfilling a market niche, let's say, that we'd identified mid-century modern, big old-fashioned is in. So let's do that. And that's the nice thing about doing working for MoFi right now, that we're targeting ideas rather than rangers and whatever. We have the ability to do this. Now, having released that and having that comment, they're a bit bigger than I thought. So, well, let's try doing a smaller one. But I wasn't prepared to go too small because, as a two-way, as I've already said, the smaller the driver, the further it's got to move to maintain the bass. And so I can't go too small in cone, otherwise I'm defeating. It's bad enough that in many videos I've said I will never do a two-way concentric, and then I did. So, well, okay, but it's a big one. Well, okay, I've just done a slightly smaller one, but no, that's as far as I'm going to go. So we'll see how long that holds up. But so the 8-inch one, it was okay. Well, an 8-inch version of a 10-inch. What's the starting point? Well, a ratio of 8 to 10. I just gave the brief to the mechanical engineer doing the cabinet design. I said, just reduce all the dimensions by 80%. Reduce the wall thickness 80%, the width, the height, the depth, thickness of the front baffle, and see what that looks like. And then in terms of, well, what do I do for the drive unit? Do I have to start from scratch developing specifically an 8-inch drive unit? Because one of the problems always, if you're doing a range of 2 speakers, you're trying to keep the sound signature pretty much the same. Yeah, there'll be differences because it is small and maybe it doesn't have as much bass and sensitivity and things. How best to do that? And I realized that once I did some simulations of the 80% reduced volume, actually 50% reduced volume, 0.8 cubed, 50% reduction in volume, and the reduction, about 64% reduction in cone area, then I needed exactly the same motor strength in order to get all the bass alignments correct. And so that means I can use exactly the same motor and fit exactly the same tweeter down the middle. And okay, so I need a smaller cone. Well, could I get away with simply trimming down we have a mold that makes the paper cone. And obviously there's flash at the edges. And so you have a trimming tool to trim it to exactly the size required for a 10-inch driver. Well, what if I just move that trimming tool inwards, kind of centimetre on radial width? Just cut it down a bit smaller. But meant that I had to design a new surround, because obviously that's got to fit the chassis and the reduced size of cone. But it was really a relatively straightforward development process. And so that's what I did. So it really is a mini-me version of the SourcePoint 10. And it sounds really nice. Cute, you can kind of not quite tuck it under your arm, but it's a lot more manageable than the 10-inch. It's always interesting because, I say to you, it's 80% of the size. Every linear dimension is 0.8 of the size. That doesn't sound like much, but it actually contributes to one half of the physical volume. So when you put them side by side, and especially when you pick it up, you realize, yeah, it is substantially smaller. But in photos, if you've got no scale to judge it by, you really can't tell whether you're looking at the 10-inch speaker or the 8-inch. Yeah, there's subtle giveaways. It's the same logo badge. So that looks slightly different proportionally in the pictures. And obviously the tweeter being exactly the same tweeter, that hasn't shrunk. So if you look carefully, you could tell. But otherwise, it looks near identical.
A question, since you have designed for CAF, Infinity, ELAC, Pioneer, now MoFi, is there a specific sound signature that you like to go for, or would you say that each one of those speakers all sounds differently?
There's a degree of them sounding different. I always have in my mind what sound I want it to have. And I would say that does change through the years as I get old and deaf. Or as I've learned more about what is the sound that I feel I want. There's a lot of things I keep the same always, but there are things that progress as I've progressed myself. I've seen lots of reviews where reviewers comment that even with a different product from a different company and a different price point, there is an identifiable Andrew behind the sound of the speaker. So I would have to conclude that there is something that stays with me all the time. But if there are some variations, it's either because I felt that for a certain class of speaker, a certain price point, since everything is a compromise, there is no perfect speaker. Doesn't matter how much money you pay. So what it comes down to is what compromises have you chosen to make at any particular price point? And the higher in price, you would hope there's fewer compromises, but there still are compromises. And I can afford to deal with some of the things that I couldn't deal with at the lower price points. And maybe something that I could afford to fix in a lower cost speaker, in the more expensive one, I've now realized, well, what I really wished I could always fix is this feature. And so I'll concentrate more on that rather than the one I worried about before because it was all I could fix. So that's where you'd get some differences in what I've presented to people.
What's the real main benefit for you for having a coaxial concentric driver in most of your designs?
So I always remember prior to Kef doing concentric drivers that, in the days when Kef developed the concentric, I was still in product research. So I knew what was going on, and I'd worked on building some concentric drivers myself because we had this big project with cooperation with Bang & Olufsen and the Technical University in Copenhagen to do this big thing in anechoic chamber to understand room acoustics. So I built 30 concentric drivers in little spheres, 5-inch spheres, for that project. So as I became chief engineer, so moving over into product development, I was having to develop both regular two-way speakers and concentrics. And yes, there are problems presented to you when you choose to do a concentric, but compared to the problems presented to you when you're doing regular space drivers, it seemed to me a no-brainer. And the qualities I hear that I get from a concentric driver of this, especially with vocals, this immediacy, this presence, that the vocalist is just standing there in front of you, and just how much of a full image I get. Concentrics have always given me that. And the problems you face is, of course, there is no such thing as a single full range driver, technically. I mean, people advertise single full range drivers. They're not.
Yeah.
They don't go down low enough in frequency with any significant output capability. They don't go smoothly up to 20K. They kind of, through resonance, get some output up there, but it's not clean. They don't have good directivity characteristics. So what we've always been forced to do is, at a minimum, go to a two-way system. So we have a bass driver that can properly handle bass and cross over in the 2 to 4K region, typically, to a tweeter. Now, we do that because to produce low bass is all about air movement. Well, technically, everything is about air movement. Otherwise, we wouldn't have sound. In space, no one can hear you scream. So you're moving air. And for low frequencies, you have to move a large quantity of air, but relatively slowly. So that means big drivers, and they can be heavy because they only have to move slowly. But at high frequencies, you need to move very fast, very high acceleration, but you don't have to move a large quantity of air. Therefore, you have a big cone moving a long distance for the bass, a small diaphragm moving very quickly for the tweeter. Now you've got to integrate them together through a crossover, so they presumably sound seamless. You don't hear that transition. Unfortunately, it's so easy to hear that transition because the radiation characteristics of the drivers are different. The spatial location of them is different. And so let's just say in the first instance, you've got a tweeter above bass driver. So they're vertically separated. Well, of course, we can hear source elevation. You know if the bird's flying above you or if it's landing in front of you. You can hear a helicopter taking off and going up over you. So you know how high the sound source is. Well, now we've got two sound sources covering the same frequency range to some degree at two different distances. So we're kind of subconsciously aware of that. But also, if I stand up or sit down, I'm now at a different relative distance. I'm closer to the bass driver when I sit down than I am to the tweeter. And that delay time difference, because it takes time for the sound wave to propagate from the tweeter to the listener, that causes phase errors and wiggles in the frequency response, and vice versa when you stand up. So you've got a very narrow defined vertical listening window where they sum correctly. And on top of that, their directional characteristics are different. Every sound source at low frequencies radiates uniformly all the way around. At high frequencies, starts to beam and focus the sound only in the forward direction at the expense of stuff going to the side. And the point at which that happens, the frequency at which that happens, is governed by the size of the driver. So a 6 or 8 inch driver will have started to become directional at about 1 kilohertz and get progressively more directional. But a tweeter, and say we're crossing over 3K, so the woofer is directional at that point. The tweeter is not. So if they add up correctly on axis, they cannot add up correctly off axis.
Right.
So the power response into the room suffers, both from the vertical thing and the horizontal. You know, in the vertical direction, you've got that directivity combined with the spacing that further complicate the vertical response. And so the energy radiating into the room does not match the on-axis to the direct sound. And we listen to a combination of both when we're listening in a room. We don't listen in an anechoic chamber. We don't routinely listen outdoors unless we're kind of live sound amplification in a open air theatre. So we make some judgment on sound balance based on the acoustics of the listening room, how far we are away from the speaker, the contribution of room sound to direct sound from the speaker. Now, how do we fix those? Well, we make a concentric driver. We put the tweeter down the middle on the same axis as the woofer and at the apex of the cone. So now there's no time delay differences in any direction. No matter where you go, the sound of the woofer and the tweeter arrive at the same relative time. You don't have a vertical separation, so you don't hear different sound source elevation. And then thirdly, the directivity is matched through that crossover point. With the correct design of the cone, it is a waveguide, and the waveguide seeks to give a much smoother directivity, more matching of the bass driver. So what you get off axis is just a gently falling response as you go up to higher frequencies. You don't get this kind of thing like that.
Right.
So it fixes all of that. However, there are practical issues, as I hinted at earlier, in how to do that optimally without introducing new types of issues. As I say, nothing is perfect. Everything's got its pluses and minuses. And of course, the majority of speakers are separated. They're not concentric. So it's not like I'm saying you can't do a good or a very good speaker the conventional way. But for me, my choices are to do it whenever I can with a concentric driver. And I believe I hear the consequences of that whenever I listen to a concentric system.
So you'd say it has a more pinpoint, source pointy type of imaging.
It appears to have both a very solid imaging characteristic, but at the same time, it maintains a general sense of image so well off axis and around the room, and the tonality remains constant around the room. But I can sit in I've got a library, that library behind me. There's a nice coffee table and some comfy chairs. Everything is comfy chairs. And so I can sit right at the back there. And the sound presentation is different from the immediacy when you sit in the hotspot, but it's still this wonderful integrated big image filling the end of the room. So it works very well in that respect. You just have to work with, okay, I mean, people will point out that, well, surely with the cone moving, doesn't that cause a problem and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it's something you have to take care of. I just would rather take care of that problem than the other problems when you do a regular speaker. And of course, I've done lots of regular speakers. It's not as if I don't.
Here's a question for you. What
Yeah.
tweeters were considered AMTs, ribbons, or are they hard to make work with concentric designs? And how did you decide on the tweeter used?
Right. So it is very difficult to integrate an AMT into a concentric design. It has been done. ELAC have done it, or ELAC Germany have done it. It's just that if I thought it was difficult to optimize the performance of a concentric driver with a dome tweeter, it's even more difficult to optimize that when you got an AMT. The wavefront shape is not optimum for going in to that waveguide. The radiating area is relatively small compared to the entrance into that cone. And so, and it means you got a much larger voice coil than, excuse me, than you would have had if you're using a dome tweeter. So there's issues with that come to the fore, and cost because of the magnet structure design. So, and personally, I've not traditionally been that much of a fan of AMTs. They have their own compromises. Technically they don't work like people claim that they do in 5 times the air velocity kind of thing. That's not a real thing. So obviously some people love them, some people don't. But in terms of how you get it into a concentric, I was never interested in pursuing that. I'm more interested in pursuing better dome tweeters. And so far, I've stuck with soft domes. In the early days of metal domes, some of them were just awful.
Yeah.
It's taken a long time to push that breakup mode high enough. And, now with careful design, you can push it out to certainly beyond 30. And back to KEF again, they've got some special construction of the domes with reinforcement that move it up high. With TAD, I was using beryllium domes, and that pushes that out very high. It's just that they're very expensive to do. And interestingly, the beryllium domes that we were using at TAD, they used a different manufacturing technique. They used vapor deposition. Every other beryllium dome on the market is made from a foil. So you roll the beryllium very thin, and then you stamp the dome and form it.
Right.
We kind of grow it onto a substrate and then etch away the substrate when we were TAD. So the grain structure is different, the characteristics of the beryllium material are different, and we could push our resonant frequency, dome breakup beyond 50K, 50, 60, 70K.
Wow.
But with manufacturing a foil beryllium dome, because of the limitations in manufacturing and stamping beryllium, most of those domes don't get it much above 30K, if that. And that's a bit of a disappointment to me. So, for the cost. But I'm always looking at different materials. But again, trying to get the right wave shape from the tweeter to couple into that waveguide. Even if we forget about concentric drives and say, whenever I do a dome tweeter, I'll always put it in a waveguide, because again, that helps. It does the same job as putting it in a concentric drive in terms of controlling the directivity and matching it better to the base driver. So waveguides are a good thing. And since the waveguide doesn't have to move, you can do generally a better performance out of the tweeter in a pure waveguide than you can in a pure concentric drive. It takes a lot of effort.
Right.
So whatever waveguide you developed that worked with a soft dome tweeter, if you just stick a metal dome tweeter in there, won't work very well. So you have to totally re-engineer the shape of the waveguide to work best with metal domes. And these days, the soft domes that we are all developing, they go out to 35 or 40K.
Yep.
The old days of soft dome, it's certainly true. Old soft domes used to be between 3 and 6 dB down at 20K. Now we can move that to 35 or 40K. And so the reason for going to ribbons and AMTs supposedly in the past was they have a much more extended top end response. Well, not now. It's possible to get domes that go out as high as AMTs, and maybe even broader directivity at those frequencies than the AMT gives. So I find that I still prefer a good dome tweeter. I haven't seen a need for myself to change that unless I come up with some wholly different way of doing an AMT type speaker.
Right.
But for the foreseeable future, my goal is just to continue improving regular dome types. I am going to look. I want to be in the background playing with ideas, and working with MoFi has given me the time to do that. So any product that I'm coming out with, I've been trying out things devoid of what the product might be. Always in product development, you're incorporating stuff that you got a pretty darn good idea that it will work.
Yep.
Because you need the certainty you've got a development schedule to meet. Research is one of the expressions I always like to say is if I knew what I was doing, it wouldn't be research. And that's just so true. Research is when you don't know what you're doing, you're trying to find out what you should be doing. And as you get closer and closer to it working, you go, okay, that got potential for a product. Put it on the shelf. Next time I'm doing a product that I go, what idea could I incorporate? Oh, that one on that shelf up there, that seemed to have potential. And now it's just how you productionize it. You kind of need to know it was going to work in the first place before you commit it to product development. I'm always thinking ideas in the background and playing with them.
Do you got other things coming up over there at MoFi, or?
Yes, I thought I'd be out of a job.
Well, we're very excited to see what you come up with in the coming years, and are proud to offer your new speakers to our customers. Maybe I can go into a little review that Kellen wrote. So we've had Kellen is our national sales director here at Dream Media, and he's had the SourcePoint 10s for probably a couple months now of really critical listening, enjoying the speakers. And his review is that they're very, very holographic. The imaging and soundstage is excellent, and the clarity is phenomenal. I do find you may need to supplement a sub for more bass output in medium to large size rooms. It's a slightly brighter speaker, which I don't mind, and I don't find fatiguing. And I've heard the SB8s are a little more neutral and subtle over the 10s. They're well crafted and just overall a very fun speaker.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly, this idea of bass, I get phenomenal bass. It depends on your room. And I get in a 20
So
by
in
30.
our video that we did a video on them, and we talk about how positioning is key to the bass response.
Right.
So anybody who's watching this live stream and you're interested in learning more about these, be sure to stay tuned to our channel, because on Saturday we're going to have the video on the unboxing setup and just some little tips on configuring these. But sorry, go ahead, Andrew.
No, I mean, certainly there's obviously a limit in how low bass you can get out of anything. And yes, it's a bigger speaker, so you expect more bass. It can go very loud with, let's say, what bass it does have. It can go surprisingly low in the right setup, but it is also efficient. And you can't have everything.
Yeah. Well, and at the price point too, you got to think we have speakers $20,000, $30,000 a pair in that same room.
Yeah,
so
exactly. Yes.
You always got to look at the price to performance, which you really have knocked it out of the park with this product.
Right. And that's, I'm not doing high end yet.
Yeah.
Maybe I should make that one of the things for my anniversary. Been doing this long enough. Spit the bones out of this one. But I make certain choices. Everybody does when they design a system, and to going down much lower than I got from this speaker. Bass is expensive. Mm-hmm. You give up a lot of efficiency to get some reasonable extra degree of extension. Or you have to have the box even bigger. And so, I kind of blend all of it. I could have made this an 85 dB speaker. It's just that people don't expect a box of that size and configuration to, 10-inch bass driver, and it's only 85 dB sensitivity. Yeah, but you said you wanted bass. You can't have it all. So I blend those compromises. And certainly one of the things when people make those kind of comments, it does inspire me to think, okay, you want bass? I guess I'm going to have to give you bass. Right? So,
well, you got to think we're primarily a home theater company, and we're putting in 18s, 21s, dual 21s now in some of these systems. So our expectation is crazy, which is why Kellen's recommending to pair it with a nice, tight, hard-hitting sub. I know traditionally 2-channel has kind of frowned away from adding in subwoofers, but we've been doing that a little bit more recently, and we have a couple manufacturers that integrate really well with 2-channel.
The problem with this is, let's say I do a 3-way or a 4-way system like the original TAD. My job as the speaker designer is to integrate all the drivers together to give you a seamless transition between them. And yet, with subsat systems, we go, here, you have a go. Just, you have a play around, see what you can do, right? With no real guidance, no technical knowledge, no measurement knowledge of what the system is doing, just some knobs to endlessly twiddle with until you get what sounds right to you. And you could argue what sounds right to you is all that really matters. It's not right what sounds right to someone else. It's what sounds right to you in your room. But it's still, in a way, that ought to have been my job. And so I passed it on to someone else. So that's always been the resistance to the concept of subwoofers in stereo systems. And on top of that, most amplifiers in stereo systems do not have subwoofer outs. So it's not that straightforward to add a subwoofer in unless you do it at speaker level. And then on top of that, adding in a subwoofer, unless you're putting a high-pass filter into the main channel, which of course you do most of the time in a home theater setup because you have that capability, your main speaker is working just as hard as it ever was, even though you got a subwoofer. So if it was running out of steam at some sound pressure level in the bass, it's still going to run out of steam at that exact same level because you haven't limited the low frequencies that go into the main system. So in a stereo system, all you can hope for if you somehow add in a subwoofer is that you get more extension, but you can't play any louder. Home theater is totally different. Home theater was configured from the beginning to understand that it's going to integrate subwoofers in and put high-pass filters in, and obviously these days with room correction. But how do you incorporate room correction if you're a vinyl enthusiast? Because you've got to digitize all your vinyl. So home theater is a very different beast. It's all digitally based and DSP. Just traditional two-channel stereo is not. So yes, you can get subwoofers integrated, but they're going to be, let's say, relatively less useful in what you can do by adding a subwoofer than it would have been in a home theater setup. But you do at least have the possibility, to some degree, if you've got multiple subs, you can place them where your main speakers aren't. Your main speakers have to compromise between location to give most uniform bass, but also imaging and all these kind of things. You don't have to worry about that with a subwoofer. But again, if that subwoofer is only going up to 50 hertz, all it's doing is helping out your room problems below 50 hertz.
And that's what we're using subs for, is to kind of get into those subsonics when applicable. So, they're not being used all the time, but a couple good subs with these would really take them up.
Yeah, there's no doubt that even that extra half an octave to go from mid-40s down to low 30s can make a tremendous difference on quite a lot of music. And going into the 20s, yes, it just adds that openness and spaciousness that is missing from most speakers, even if the music doesn't demand high levels. And I think there's a difference between the optimum subwoofer for a two-channel system compared to a home theater. As you say, in home theater, it's all about,
absolutely,
if I put a 30-inch subwoofer in there, I'd be putting several in there, right? Music, pure music, even rap-type music, doesn't have the levels of very low bass and infra bass that you have in home theater. And so you can have the kind of driver design and box design that gives you extension, but doesn't have to give you stupendous levels of low bass because it's not recorded. If there is bass in there, it's relatively low level at those reaching subsonic frequencies. And so you can pick your subwoofer characteristics commensurate with that. But of course,
what genre of music would you say would complement these speakers the best?
It's surprising what I've played pretty much every genre because I've had so many people now coming through my space.
Or let me ask this: what's your favorite?
Either if I just want to get emotional from music, Celtic, anything that's got a Celtic influence to it, or even some of the new tango music, it can be just amazing, tears rolling down my face kind of thing. But I've played a lot of heavy metal recently, rock types of rock that I wouldn't have listened to before. on recommendations that people have brought and wanted to play, we had some people and a lot of young sales people from this store come in, and they wanted to play all that kind of music, and bands that I'd never heard of, but we'd play, and they'd turn it up and up and up, and it was. I think a lot in the past, that kind of music it's already raucous and a lot of high energy stuff, and my ears tend to close down when I listen to that. But here, it was just, didn't matter how loud he played it, it just kept going, and you didn't feel that your ears were tired after you'd listened to it. And so it's encouraged me to explore more variety of music. It's just like with food. You might not like a particular style of food, but there'll be one or two dishes that you still like, that kind of met your expectation of sort of the things you always liked, but there was a twist on it from a different culture. I feel the same way about music. There's a genre of music that I wouldn't routinely listen to, but once in a while I'll find something like, oh, I'm surprised they did stuff like that. So, and I think that's the merit of a good speaker, that you can just play whatever genre. There should never be a favored genre for a speaker. Just because I listen to particular genres most of the time doesn't mean that that's all that the speaker should work with. Otherwise, I won't sell them.
Well, I appreciate your insight there. Shane, I just looked up at the clock and we're 18 minutes over. Should we wrap it up?
Yeah, well, thanks, Andrew. Guys, if you want to check out any of these speakers, of course, Zach, where can you get them?
Yeah, if you guys are interested in these speakers or anything 2-channel hi-fi home theater related, you can reach out for a free consultation. That's something we do different here at Dream Media. Is we like to video call with you and look at your exact space and tailor packages specific to your needs and budget. And we're nationwide with free shipping, and would love the opportunity to earn your business. I really appreciate you coming on today, Andrew. It was an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you. No surprise it went over, because I always talk too much.
No, it's all good. Very insightful.
Oh, it was awesome.
Good.
Well, thank you, guys. Don't forget to like this video if you found it useful. Go to dreammedia.com. Also, subscribe to their channel as well. If you guys want to support this channel even further, you can go to patreon.com/Shane Lee. That is patreon.com/Shane Lee if you would like to support the channel even further and keep up with the latest news over here on the channel. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share,